30 top experts gave up. The system had been down for 3 days, costing millions of dollars. And yet, in just 1 minute, a broke cleaning lady rebooted everything with exactly 3 lines of code. And the only person who saw it all was a millionaire. You're probably wondering who she is and what happened after that fateful minute. Stay tuned for this extraordinary story. 3 days of a total shutdown in the bioprocessing data system. No one was laughing while thousands of dollars bled out of the budget every single minute, like blood dripping from a wound that wouldn't clot. The company's name was Helix Corp, headquartered right inside the biotech industrial zone on the east side of San Diego. They didn't make drugs, they didn't grow cells. They did something harder, designing algorithms to analyze simulated genetic data. And the very thing that crashed the system? A parallel code segment that got pushed past its limits. It should have been obvious if someone had looked closely. But for 3 whole days, 30 engineers, including one who used to teach at MIT, couldn't figure it out. Miles Lancaster, the CEO, wasn't the type to lose his cool. But this time, it wasn't patience he lost. It was faith. I don't pay you people to tell me what it probably is. I pay you to know. Miles slammed his pen onto the table. No one said a word. Some glanced at each other. Others stared at their screens as if the answer might magically appear. He didn't shout. He didn't pound the desk. He just stood up and said, "Fix it tonight. Or tomorrow. None of you has a reason to still be here." Then he walked out of the room. Meanwhile, 1 floor down, the place no one went unless they needed to replace an air filter, Cassie Briggs was folding up her mop. She worked the night shift. Right as everyone else left, she clocked in. Nobody paid much attention to her. Gray uniform, hair pulled into a high ponytail, one old Bluetooth earpiece in her ear. She didn't play music, she just wore it to pretend. She didn't have to hear what people said about her. Cassie had studied microchip engineering at UC Irvine. 2 years. Enough to qualify for a research program. Then her older brother got into a motorcycle accident. She dropped out, for good. Tonight, Cassie had been assigned to clean the auxiliary analysis wing, the area with the parallel loop processing workstations. A place nobody cleaned unless they were forced to. The room was nearly pitch black, lit only by the faint blue glow of the server array still softly humming. She wore gloves, pushed the chemical cart like she was carrying a sleeping child. She didn't like to rush. She cleaned every corner like she was thinking. Truth was, she was thinking. Suddenly, her eyes stopped on a keyboard that was still lit, not locked, not powered down. On the screen, a debug panel from the system's log processing interface. It wasn't the first time she'd seen one, but it was the first time she saw that exact error, the one she'd once studied. She didn't touch the machine. She just looked. Really looked. A loop segment was hitting a data delay threshold, hard. But instead of cutting the branch, the system kept forcing it back to the mainframe. No one had reset the auxiliary buffer. A basic mistake. But nobody had stepped far enough back to see it. Cassie slipped off her gloves, set them gently on the table. Her fingers moved like they'd done this 100 times. Clear aux buffer, run sync check, restart chain. 3 lines, 1 press of enter. The screen blinked bright. The server array on the left suddenly let out a steady hum. The system had started auto-optimizing. All metrics were shifting back into the green. She stood still, didn't smile, didn't celebrate, just watched. Then typed close session, log out. She pulled her gloves back on and kept mopping like she'd never stopped. Far away, in the security operations room on the 12th floor, someone was still watching the night cameras. Miles. He wasn't sure what he was seeing, but one thing was clear. She walked in like a janitor, but touched the system like someone who knew it from the inside. He picked up his radio. "Who's on maintenance duty on the 4th floor?" Reception answered, "No one, sir. Just the cleaning staff. Night shift, Cassie Briggs." Miles didn't respond. He rewound the footage, watched every keystroke she made. He didn't understand the commands, but he understood one thing. No one gets that lucky, typing exactly the right 3 lines of code without knowing exactly what they're doing. And if she did know, then she didn't belong down there, wearing that uniform. Cassie left the server room at 3:18 a.m. No one saw her out. No one said a word. She left the room spotless, like it had just been installed. Except for one thing. The system was back online. And for the first time in 3 days, Miles had no idea who to call to say thank you. He only knew he'd just witnessed something different. The next morning, as Cassie pushed her mop cart into the ground floor hallway, the internal line rang. A call from the executive offices. Floor 16. The receptionist's voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. Just flat. The CEO would like to see you. Right now. Don't bring anything. She stood still for a moment, eyes on the mop, but her hands had already gone cold. She couldn't think of anything she'd done wrong. Except for the one thing last night. And if that had been discovered, she knew it could get her fired. Just because the system worked again didn't mean she had the right to touch it. Cassie wiped her hands on her shirt, tightened her shoelaces, then stepped into the elevator. The 16th floor was bright, quiet, and smooth, so silent you could hear every single footstep. Miles's office sat at the end of the hallway. Wooden door, black metal nameplate, nothing flashy, but something about it made you stand up straighter. Miles sat behind his desk, gray shirt, tie neatly knotted. He didn't look up right away, didn't motion for her to sit. Just flipped a page in the folder on his desk and said, without raising his head, "Where did you study?" Cassie paused. The question hit fast and direct. No small talk, no build-up. She glanced around, spotted an empty chair, but stayed standing. UC Irvine. Her voice was dry. Microchip engineering. But I didn't finish. Just 2 years. Miles set the folder aside and looked up at her for the first time. His gaze wasn't harsh, but it was sharp, the kind of look that came from analyzing, not empathizing. "Why did you drop out?" he asked. "My brother had an accident. Our parents had already passed. There was no one else to cover the hospital bills but me." She said it evenly, like she was talking about someone else. "I needed money fast, and janitorial work was the quickest thing I could get without a degree." Miles didn't respond right away. He gave a small nod, like confirming something he already knew. Then he hit the intercom button. A minute later, the chief engineer walked in. "Check the auxiliary processing system on the 4th floor. Last night's data." Arthur, an older, quiet man, got to work on his tablet. A few swipes, a few lines of code. "The system rebooted at 3:18 a.m., he said. "The auxiliary processing chain is fully synced. No error logs recorded after that. It's running more efficiently than the default config." Miles didn't look at Cassie. He just said to Arthur, "Thank you. You can return to your meeting." When the door closed, the room fell so quiet you could hear the faint breeze brushing against the windows. Miles crossed his arms. There was nothing threatening in his stance, but it still made it hard for anyone facing him to take a full breath. "I don't care who did it," he said slowly. "I just want to know if that person knew what they were doing." Cassie remained standing. Her shoulders weren't slouched, but they weren't square either. She kept her eyes on the floor, like scrubbing it clean might be easier than answering that question. "I didn't fix anything," she said. "I just saw something off, and I remembered a solution. I figured trying couldn't make it worse." "Trying," Miles repeated, "and got lucky." Cassie lifted her head. For the first time, she looked him straight in the eye. "No, I wouldn't call that luck. I studied parallel branching systems. That error, it wasn't unfamiliar. But I also knew I wasn't supposed to touch it." "You weren't," Miles agreed. "But you did. And because of that, the whole operation is running again. What do you think I should do about that?" She stayed silent. He stood up and walked toward her, not close enough to intimidate, but close enough that she couldn't look away. "I'm not planning to fire you," he said. "I want you to join the system review team. 3 days. No change in your position. Just observe. When you see something wrong, speak up." Cassie blinked. She didn't have time to think. The words just slipped out. "I'm just a janitor." "Exactly," Miles replied. "And the janitor just did what 30 people couldn't, because I looked at it differently." "Right," he said, then paused. "I need someone who can see what everyone else misses." Cassie glanced down at her hands, the skin rough and dry from cleaning chemicals. She didn't know if this was a chance or some strange kind of trap. "I don't want to be treated like the main character in some weird movie," she said quietly. "I didn't do it to get noticed." "And I'm not inviting you to star in a movie," Miles replied. "I just want the system fixed, and you're good at that." A pause. She didn't look at him again, just turned half a step and said, "I'll join, but I'm still keeping the night shift." I'm not giving that up. Why? He asked. Because I think more clearly when I'm cleaning floors. Miles pressed his lips together. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened just a little. All right, he said. Starting tonight. From that night on, Cassie began showing up in the tech room. No official announcement, no names on a roster. She stood quietly in the corner, near the backup equipment cabinet, just close enough to see every screen, but never in anyone's way. She didn't wear a lab coat. Still in her janitor's uniform, neat, tidy, with one hand always resting gently on the edge of a small notebook. No one told her to take notes. But she did. She wrote down almost everything that was said, even scraps of theories or throwaway ideas. But for the first 5 days, Cassie didn't speak. No questions, no debates, no hand raised, no interruptions. She just listened, and that made a few people uneasy. What is she? A young engineer with a buzz cut and ever-present headphones muttered just loud enough for Cassie to hear as he walked past. Some kind of new age observer? Or a lucky spy? Could be a PR stunt, another one replied. Make the company look socially deep. Maybe she's a friend of Miles or something. Cassie didn't react. She didn't even lift her head, but she heard it. All of it. Crystal clear. She'd worked in worse places before. She'd lived through days when people only saw her as the girl who hauled medical waste, even while she read engineering textbooks on her breaks. On the third day, the team hit a data transfer error between 2 intermediary processors. The cable map was printed out and pinned to the whiteboard. Everyone crowded around it, arguing. The signal showed intermittent drops, but no one could pinpoint the cause. They spent nearly 2 hours checking node by node. Cassie didn't step forward. She just watched. And she saw. One segment of the switching layout, a small one, had been pinned to the board slightly misaligned, barely 2 millimeters off, but just enough to throw off the cable angle when cross-referenced, a detail no one thought to question, because no one believed a printout could be wrong. Cassie said nothing. She quietly walked up, removed the map, aligned it properly with the grid on the board, and pinned it back in place. Then she returned to her spot, wrote one line in her notebook, and said nothing more. About 10 minutes later, Miles walked in. He looked at the board, looked at the map, then frowned. He pulled up a copy on his tablet, compared it to the one on the wall, and got it immediately. Misaligned axis? Who fixed this? No one answered. The room fell completely silent. Cassie kept her head down, but Miles glanced in her direction. Not directly, not obviously, just a quick look, enough to let the rest of the team know exactly what he was thinking. And that silence cut like a knife. The next day, during a short team meeting, before the projector was even turned on, Miles spoke. Cassie, if you notice something off, speak up. No need to wait until the end. Everyone turned to look at her. Some stares felt heavier than usual. Cassie simply gave a small nod. Not surprised. But from that day on, the energy in the room shifted. A few people started cutting her off, even when she'd only said a word or two. One engineer even asked outright, "What credentials do you have to make suggestions?" Cassie answered calmly, "I'm not making suggestions. I'm pointing out what's wrong." Miles didn't jump in to defend her, but he didn't let it slide either. Every time the team's discussion circled in a loop or hit a wall, he'd turn her way and ask, "Cassie, what do you see?" She didn't speak much, usually just offered one observation, with evidence. No drama, no big speeches, and that's exactly why it worked. On the 5th night, while the team was analyzing background logs, the system suddenly flagged a high-temp warning on a central node. The data didn't show a clear cause. The hardware was still operating within safe limits, but the cooling fan's metrics were erratic. Speculation started flying. Unstable power supply, maybe a sensor glitch. One engineer proposed replacing the entire cooling unit. Estimated cost, over $7,000, plus downtime. Cassie stood up, walked over to the system. She didn't touch anything, just stood close, tilted her head slightly, then stepped back. "It's not a cooling unit issue," she said. "Just listen." The room blinked. One guy let out a scoff, but Miles raised his hand. The room went quiet. The fan sound was off. Not a grind, not a hum. A soft rhythmic wobble, like something small was caught inside. Not malfunction. Obstruction. "There might be an object stuck in the fan shaft," Cassie said. "Not big enough to break it, but just enough to keep the fan from hitting its proper speed. The thermal warning is accurate, but the fan is off rhythm. Miles gestured to open the protective casing. A small piece of plastic, snapped off from an internal mount, fell out of the shaft. No one knew when it had gotten in. Cassie stepped back to her spot, didn't say another word. But this time, the looks in the room weren't the same. They started to second-guess whether they were really better than her. They didn't call it luck anymore. Miles didn't offer praise, but he looked at her longer. And for the first time, someone pulled out a chair for her, a seat close to the board. She didn't sit, just bowed her head slightly and wrote another line in her notebook. No one knew what she wrote, but one thing was certain: it wouldn't be the last line. Cassie had no idea when Miles started digging into her background. Maybe it was after the fan incident, when she solved the issue just by listening. Maybe earlier, when she stood in his office on the 16th floor and quietly said she thought more clearly while cleaning floors. Cassie's personnel file wasn't anything special, but in the emergency contact section, she listed one name: Caleb Briggs. Note beside it: older brother, wheelchair, stable condition. Miles paused a long time on that line. Caleb was born in 1993, suffered spinal cord damage in a motorcycle accident in 2019. Cassie was listed as his sole guardian. She had no other family. Every medical bill over the past 4 years had been paid from a single bank account under Cassie's name. Miles closed the file, didn't say a word. But after that day, every time he saw her arrive with her familiar cart, he didn't look away so quickly. He watched her a little longer, listened to her voice a little more closely, and stayed back in the control room a few extra minutes, even after the others had left. On a Saturday night, just before 11 p.m., Cassie entered the control room like she always did. Mop in hand, eyes scanning the monitors still glowing in the dark. Miles was still there, sleeves slightly wrinkled, tie off and resting on the desk. "You're still here?" she asked, not looking at him, just bending to wipe the edge of the table. "Just like you," Miles replied. "When I go home, everything's still there, but if I stay here, at least it's something I can control." Cassie let out a small laugh. "You talking about software or emotions?" "Both," Miles said, and he wasn't joking. Cassie didn't answer right away. She moved toward the corner of the desk, where a stack of error printouts lay marked in red. She started tidying them up, hands working while her voice stayed calm. "Back when I was in school, I couldn't afford printed textbooks. Most of the other students had tablets. Me? I borrowed books from the library and copied them by hand." Miles turned to look at her. "You copied entire textbooks?" "Yeah, a few hundred pages, bit by bit every night. Some nights I was timing laundry at the coin-op while I wrote." "And you remembered all of it?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "Not all, but the important stuff, yeah. When you write it by hand, the things that matter stick." Miles leaned back in his chair. He didn't know why, but that hit him in a way that felt both sad and quietly warm. "My father," Miles said, "was the kind of man who never accepted mistakes. I'd get a 98 on a test and he'd ask where the other 2 points went. Give a presentation and he'd only ask, why didn't the 4th person in the 3rd row clap?" Cassie looked up, the first time she'd met his eyes in the room that now held only the two of them. "So you're more afraid of being wrong than losing money." Miles pressed his lips together. He didn't deny it, but he didn't nod either. "I'm not afraid of being wrong," he said after a beat. "I'm afraid of people seeing me wrong." Cassie gave a small nod. "I'm the opposite. I'm afraid of seeing something wrong and not being allowed to fix it." Silence settled in. The quiet hum of the server bank filled the room like a third presence. 2 people, separated by a single desk, no longer strangers from 2 different worlds. "Tomorrow?" Miles said. "Are you staying after your shift?" "Same as always." "Well then, if I said I might invite you to lunch in the staff cafeteria, what would you think?" Cassie raised an eyebrow slightly, as if still unsure if it was a real offer. But when she saw he didn't take it back, she asked, "Has anyone ever had lunch with you before?" "Probably," he said, "but no one's ever brought a mop." "Then I'll bring one," she said, half joking, half not. Miles didn't laugh out loud, but the corner of his mouth lifted, and for once it wasn't forced. The next day at exactly 12:05, Cassie walked into the cafeteria carrying an old canvas tote. Inside were her notebook, a technical math book, and a worn-down pencil. Miles was already waiting. No one really noticed. But for him, it was the first time he sat next to someone, without needing to hide the part of himself that was still human. After that first lunch, the space between Cassie and Miles shifted. They didn't talk more than usual. They didn't change how they addressed each other. They didn't get overly familiar. But no one at the company mistook it. Something between them was moving. The Biogen data system entered its final testing phase. While reviewing a subroutine managing access permissions, Cassie found a background script, one that, under the right conditions, could unintentionally expose user data. She didn't make a big announcement, just handed the log quietly to Arthur, the chief engineer, with a red underline. Arthur went pale. If that flaw had been found after deployment, the entire project could have been suspended for full security reevaluation. Miles was informed within 30 minutes. He didn't speak to Cassie right away. He simply watched, from a distance, as she continued working like any other day. No claim, no fishing for praise. That night, while Cassie was cleaning the hallway on the 12th floor, Miles approached. No warning. "I told the board," he said, stopping 2 steps away, "that if the project clears review, you'll be offered a position as technical advisor. Full-time, official contract." Cassie looked up from where she'd been wiping the glass railing. "An engineering contract?" "Not engineer," Miles replied. "Systems advisor. Starting salaries 5 figures, monthly." She stood up straight. The cloth in her hands no longer touched the glass. "For finding one bug?" "Not just one," Miles said. "For seeing things the whole team missed." She stayed quiet for a long time, not because she was surprised, but because she wasn't sure if she should smile or tilt her head and ask a harder question. "If I accept," she said, "it'll be because I need the money, because I like the work, because I want to keep learning. But if I accept because you like me." Miles didn't react, but something in him paused, froze. "Then every time I get listened to," Cassie continued, "I'll wonder if it's because of my ability or because of your feelings. And that," she looked him in the eye, "I can't live with." Miles looked back. No denial, no excuses. Because the truth was, she was right. He did like her. He liked how she never rushed to answer, how she saw the edges of a problem no one else noticed. He liked her calm, her quiet strength, her lack of pretense. He liked that she never bowed her head, even when she had nothing. For the rest of that week they still saw each other, still worked in the same rooms, still shared quiet moments in the hall or over coffee. But neither of them said a word about the job or the feelings. It was a Friday night. Miles was still in the control room, seated in silence. Cassie walked in like always. There was no one else around. The room was darker than usual, fluorescent lights casting faint shadows on the walls. Miles didn't look up when she entered, but he spoke. "If I were just a regular guy, no title, no money, no rigid history, would you give me a chance?" Cassie didn't answer right away. She walked to the corner of the room, set down her cleaning bag, peeled off her gloves. She stood with her back to him. "You can't peel those things off yourself," she said, "just like I can't peel my past off me." Miles turned his chair to face her, eyes locked on her silhouette. "I'm not asking anyone to strip anything away," he said. "I just want to be seen, fully, and still be allowed to stay." Cassie didn't turn around. She gave a small nod, then bent down and wiped a streak of dust off the edge of the table, even though it was spotless. The following Monday morning, Cassie submitted a request for 2 weeks off. No explanation, no return date specified. Arthur received the form and handed it to Miles. Miles held the paper, eyes tracing the slanted, tidy handwriting. Just a slight hesitation in the final line. He set the page down without a word. But that entire day, his office door stayed closed, something that hadn't happened in weeks. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the control room was strangely still. After Cassie's leave request, Miles tried calling her 3 times. Once in the morning, twice late at night. No answer, no voicemail, no reply. He texted Arthur to ask if she'd said anything before she left. Arthur shook his head, said she seemed fine. No signs of being upset or overwhelmed. But Miles knew better. Some people don't have to scream to disappear, and sometimes the quiet ones vanish deeper than anyone who ever made a scene. Work carried on. The system was nearly complete. Engineering teams worked around the clock, but Miles had lost his rhythm. He reviewed everything with more scrutiny than necessary. made edits to things that were already fine, started showing up later, stayed even later, and stopped stepping out into the hallway like he used to. 3 weeks later, the company was preparing for a high-stakes presentation, a pitch to a major investment fund from Seattle. The project needed someone to explain the technical system in plain human terms, not because there was a shortage of engineers, but because they needed someone who could walk the line between technology and people. Arthur suggested 3 names. The communications team proposed 2 more. Miles read every file, but none of them held his attention for more than 5 seconds. The presentation began at 9 a.m. sharp, in the large conference room on the 18th floor. Every seat was filled. Investors sat in the center row, flanked by engineers and executive leadership. Miles stood at the back. He didn't introduce the speaker. He simply gave a small nod. And then, Cassie walked in. No one said a word. A few people in the engineering section exchanged quick. Arthur subtly sat up straighter. Cassie wore a crisp white shirt, a thin navy jacket, hair tied high like always, no makeup. In her hand, a remote control and a compact printout of the system. She didn't look at Miles, didn't greet anyone. She just walked up, plugged the device into the projector, and launched the first slide. "Let's say," she began, voice calm and steady, "your house has a plumbing issue. No blueprints. You don't know where the pipes run. But you still need to fix it." A few people chuckled softly. "You observe water pressure. Listen to the hissing. Test each valve. Eventually, you build a mental map. That's what our system does. It figures out the hidden structure inside your data, even without a blueprint." She clicked to the next slide. Each one was clear, visual, and intuitive, designed so that no one needed an engineering degree to follow. No dense jargon, no tangled diagrams, just logic, real-life analogies, and storytelling sharp as glass. An hour later, the fund's representative stood and said, "We don't just understand the project, we understand why it needs to exist." Miles didn't react outwardly, but in his eyes, there was something different. Not pride, recognition. The presentation ended with a handshake that lasted longer than it needed to. The investors agreed to fund double the proposed amount. The project moved into its expansion phase. Cassie unplugged the device, wrapped the cable, folded her notes like she had never left. Miles stood in the hallway waiting. She saw him, but didn't stop right away. Just approached slowly, then finally spoke. "I'm leaving." He nodded. "But this time, it's for me." Miles didn't reply. Didn't ask where she'd gone for 3 weeks. Didn't ask why she came back. Cassie looked at him one last time. No promises, no declarations. But in her eyes, there was a quiet steadiness, the kind neither of them had when they first met. They didn't move closer, but they also weren't standing on opposite sides anymore. And sometimes, that alone is a beautiful enough beginning. Not everyone is born with a map that leads to opportunity. Some people only have sharp eyes, a good memory, and a heart that refuses to quit. Cassie didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she kept watching, kept listening, even to something as small as a misaligned fan in an empty room. And Miles, a man who once believed control was power, learned to let go just enough to truly see the person in front of him, not as a subordinate, not as a hidden talent, but as someone who stood up on her own terms. Success doesn't always come from the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it comes from the one still mopping the floor, but seeing what 30 others missed. So what about you? In your life, has someone ever made you stop and rethink everything you assumed about a seemingly ordinary person? Share that story with us in the comments. And if you believe in real stories, deep, human, and full of hope, don't forget to hit subscribe to Love Stories so you never miss the next journey. Thanks for staying with us all the way to the end.